Hi, my name's Jamie Bird, and I am very excited to be with you today. Well, be with you virtually today. I'm very sad that I couldn't be there in person. My plan was to be there in person. I had some issues with funding, and I was really disappointed that I wasn't going to be able to make it. And then yesterday, I tested positive for COVID. So I am figuring out that that was not meant to be this year for whatever reason. But I hope to see you guys in the future. Today, I'm going to just talk to you a little bit about classroom management and give you some strategies to use within your informal learning or in your popular music learning environments. A little bit of background about myself. I've been teaching a popular music class based in informal learning for about the last 15 years or so now. So I've played with a lot of different things and found some things that work and found some things that don't work. And I'm going to be happy to share those with you today. I also am doing my PhD in music education at the University of Florida. And a lot of my work is in informal learning in music environments. Particularly, I'm studying the relationships that happen within those informal learning environments. So some of this really makes a lot of sense to use here in our classroom management strategies talk today. So a lot of our work in informal learning is rooted, as you probably know, in Lucy Green's work here. She points out five kind of key principles that support informal learning. One of them is learning in a really haphazard way, which really simply means that we are not scaffolding our students' learning, that they're learning holistically and they're learning together, they're figuring things out kind of on their own. They're learning in peer friend groups. Alongside their peers. And we're also integrating listening, performing, improvisation, and composing into these kinds of environments. The music that our students are playing should be chosen by them. Songs that they're interested in, styles and artists that they're interested and familiar with. And then finally, in this environment, students are really learning to play by copying. And by copying, I mean like by copying by ear, right? And some of us do that a little bit differently. I think that's okay, but the true, pure, informal learning principles, defined by Lucy Green, are kind of here. So you probably know this as well, but informal learning does not look like some of our traditional ensemble experiences. So I came in as a band director and I really like organized, neat kind of environments. And so it took me a little while to get used to this because it can look really messy and it can look really chaotic and unstructured. And that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. But I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here, so I'm not going to talk too much about this. I would just suggest that you give yourself some room to figure this out if you're a little bit new to this. And just because it's not structured in the way that some of our traditional band, choir, orchestra kind of programs aren't, doesn't mean we're not doing good work. And I say that mostly for myself. It took me a good solid almost 10 years before I was willing to talk about this course that I taught because I didn't believe exactly in the process in informal learning in the way that I do now. I knew that my students were having good experiences, but I didn't share that work. So I'm glad here we can share our work. So I like to think about classroom management, obviously specifically for this informal learning music environment in five different ways. And these five different tenets here or principles are things that come from my experience. This is not rooted in the research at all. It's just the things that I've found that makes sense. So the first thing here is knowing your community. And this is a big one. I think it's really important to recognize that all of our school communities are really different. And so some things that I share with you today might work for me, but they might not work in all cases. In fact, I'm sure they won't work in all cases because our school communities are really different. So once you consider these five things, I think that will help you make a better plan for classroom management. For example, grade level. I teach at the high school level, and I do let my students perform in like corners of the performing arts building that I can't always see at all times. And so that means a lot of things, but it also means that these are high schoolers. And I don't know that I would do that with elementary school students. I don't teach elementary school. Maybe some of you do. Again, no judgment, but knowing the community of the students that you're teaching is important. I'm going to skip over there to behavioral issues because that's knowing the students as well. If you're in a school where you're doing a lot of behavior correction and students have a lot of behavior modification plans and things like that, then obviously some of the things um, might not work for you. You might have to do some more structured kinds of things in your class. The school that I've taught in for the last like 17 years here, I'm really fortunate because a lot of the students, they do typical teenage things, but for the most part, the behavior is not a big issue. I'm actually able to just teach and make little behavioral corrections. So a lot of the things you're going to hear me do, like I suggest about leaving students out of my sight and trusting that they're practicing and doing what they're supposed to be doing, is based on my school community and based on the behavioral issues or lack thereof that are in my school. And so I think it's really important inside this community as well to be thinking about the way that you're going to balance formal and informal learning. And we talk about these two certainly on a continuum. It's not purely formal and it's not purely informal for most people. My classroom looks a lot more informal now than it did, let's just say 8 years ago, right? There was a lot more formal structures in my popular music class. And now it's become a lot more informal as I'm building the culture and I'm building the musicianship and I'm building the program. And so you have to find that balance of formal and informal and what works for you. And I'm here to tell you that this, I think, whatever it is that you're doing that works for your community is okay. We call it informal learning, but we also know that there is, most of us aren't purely informal. And so if you're a little more formal and that works for you and that works for your students, great. I'm here to celebrate you and your work. I think it's really important to think about your administration and their expectations as well around community, around your school community. What do they expect when they walk into your classroom in terms of what they see? When you think back to that slide about the chaos and the loud and messiness, if your administrator walks into a classroom and that's what they see and they know what's happening, they might be okay with that. If they don't know what's going on and you haven't educated them, then obviously we might have a little bit of discord and a little bit of problems. So knowing what your administration expects, it's obviously a continuous, I'm constantly talking to them about this work is okay, this work is good, and other people are doing it. I'm not just making this up. So having a good relationship with your administration is certainly something to consider. And then finally, are you teaching a class or are you building a program? And I think there's a big difference there. A class comes in for a year or maybe a semester and then leaves. But a program, you build that musicianship and that the culture at such a deeper level. And I think that it offers you a more of a chance to be able to trust your students and to give them a little bit more autonomy. So when thinking about this culture and this environment here, I like to think about just setting up a safe classroom environment. Is it safe for the students? Is it safe for this teacher? And is it safe for the instruments? And if you can answer yes to all of those three areas, then I think you are probably in good shape. The next thing I want to talk about is building relationships. And if I could only talk about one of these things, this would be it, hence the dissertation topic. But building relationships, I think, is key to making this kind of course work. If students are on their own exploring music and finding music that they like and figuring it out together, there's that certain level of trust that has to happen. And that trust, you need those relationships to let that happen. So here are some things that I do. This certainly isn't an exclusive list, but I give them small opportunities. I give my students small opportunities to earn my trust. I'll give them an independent, something to work on independently for, let's just say 10 minutes and then report back to me. And then I'll check in on them. And so by giving them small opportunities to earn my trust, when they continue to do that, I give them bigger opportunities and bigger opportunities until many of my students, I feel very comfortable with checking in with just once throughout the entire class period, knowing that they're going to be working on what they need to be working on, knowing that they know how to find me if they need something, and we have that kind of relationship built. difficult with some of those students. I think that greeting your students as they enter the door is so big. It's a thing that we talk about in elementary school. And when I say we, I'm not an elementary person, so I don't know why I said we. But it's a thing that they talk about, people, teachers talk about in elementary school a lot. You know, you see the high five, the handshake, the hug kind of thing. And it's a little silly, but it's not silly. When we meet our students at the door, we see them as people, we greet them, we talk to them about things that are happening in their lives, and we're really building those relationships. We notice things when they walk in and they're super happy. I comment on it. Hey, you're in a good mood today. Something great happened. What happened this weekend? Or if they look, like their affect is a little bit off, then having a conversation like, hey, checking in, are you okay? You seem a little bit off today. Is everything going all right? And those little tiny things just matter. They mean so much. I ask about their families. I ask about their pets. I notice when they get new sneakers, a new haircut. Those kinds of things really help to build that relationship and that trust inside the course. I tell them jokes. I let them see me as a person. I'm kind of like a really goofy, teacher who really enjoys dad jokes. And so I tell them dad jokes all the time. And I tell them that I'm funny. I'm like, guys, I'm funny. Like, you should laugh. And so by letting them see me as a person, I think really helps. It's not just about building the relationships with your students, but it's a two-way street. Um, they want to get to know you as a teacher, just like you want to get to know them. So letting down that wall and sharing, I think really helps build that relationships and helps build the trust. And then I feel like I'm very good at reading body language and reading facial expressions of your students. And so when I have my largest class of like 60 students all at once, I'm scanning the room, I'm checking in on them. I might not even get to have a private conversation with every kid every day, but I'm reading their body language. I'm reading their facial expressions. I'm reading them so that I can check in on them visually. I can check in on them verbally if I need to help build that relationship. Because if I want them to work on their own, I gotta trust them. So the next thing we do is set norms, and we do this in the beginning of the school year. But then we also check in throughout the school year when we start to stray a little bit, because inevitably it happens, especially at the end of the year. So our norms are simple and they're student driven. And at the beginning, we start with a brainstorming session. I ask the students what they expect from each other, what they expect from me, what I can expect from them. And we just really start to have a really healthy, rich conversation about the kinds of things that should and shouldn't happen within the class. I'm going to go through this quick, but here are some of the norms that we've created in our class over the year. Sometimes I have students help with attendance. I make sure that we set up quickly. The big rule that I have in the class, or the big norm in the class, is just make music. Use your time wisely and make music. Be respectful to each other. And then I wanted to share this correcting behavior norm that I have. I use a reasonable request form, and here's an example of it. This form, we just talk about it at the beginning of the year. I say, hey, if I see you doing something and I give you a verbal reminder and you're not responding, then we're going to have to go to the next level, because I have to be able to trust you to do what you're supposed to do in this course. And so here's my reasonable request form example. I ask the students to fill it out, and this is really just prompting a conversation. They fill it out. It gives them time to step back, think about what's going on, reflect, and then it allows me to kind of see where students are coming from and begin the conversation in terms of getting them back on track for whatever they were doing that was unreasonable. The next thing that I do is I teach communication skills, much like I would teach music skills. And so the first thing I start with is teaching about communication, and I talk about feedback. I talk about that feedback has to be kind, helpful, and specific, and they know this. So we can talk about this in a musical way. We can talk about this in a personal way. In a musical way, if someone performs for the class and I ask for some feedback, hey, what do you guys think? What do you have some feedback? An example of poor feedback that doesn't meet these, where it's like, oh, that sounded really good. Well, okay, maybe it was kind. Was it helpful? Not really. And was it specific? Definitely not. Right. So we give lots of examples of what good feedback sounds like. Hey, I really like the choice of the song that you picked here. I think that it works really well with the voice of the singer and the instrumentation. I would consider thinking a little bit more about the tempo. It seemed like there were areas that it really rushed. I maybe you guys chose a quick tempo on purpose, but maybe you didn't. Now that's feedback that was kind, it was helpful, and it was specific. So we really practice giving that kind of feedback to each other. I do work on communication skills with the students. I work on modeling it, but I also work on it with peer-to-peer communication as well. So we do team building activities, especially when I have a lot of students who are new to the course, where we're getting to know you. A lot of these things are just really silly because that's who I am as a teacher. We talk about like our favorite ice cream and if we could do these silly goofy things, we could only play one instrument or whatever. So we do a lot of those kinds of team building things. Some of them are musical and some of them are not musical at all. And I think that's still important. We take time to do some verbal feedback in groups, and we call them whip arounds, where everybody has a chance to say something, and we're looking for like 30 seconds or less. And I think it's really important because we've got some students who are very outgoing and will speak for 30 minutes, and then we've got some students that you might not hear from for months. And so when we do a whip around, then students know that there's an expectation that everybody has to bring something to the table. Certainly, I model good communication skills. I try to use I language. Like, I get really upset when I expect that you are working on this bass lick and I come into the hallway and you're on your cell phone. And I felt like I could trust you and now I can't. So we need to talk about this. So I'm using this I language. I'm talking about how I'm feeling as a teacher. And I try to have the students speak that way to each other and to me as well to help build those communication skills. Of course, we all know about the compliment sandwich. We say something kind, we say something a little crunchier that really gets to the meat of the thing, and then we end with something, kind again. And then this is really important. I do these written feedback reflection forms for me often, probably about 3 times a year, where I just ask them some questions about how the course is going for them, what's going well, what's not going well. And I always leave that last question open for, is there anything you want me to know? And I think that is huge. The things that I get in there, sometimes I get really silly ones. Sometimes students will tell me silly jokes because they know I love that. Sometimes they'll open up and share parts of their lives with me that they might not have shared otherwise. And I think that is just so helpful for me as a teacher as well. So this last one here is student goal setting. I went through that pretty quickly there, but you get the idea. Student goal setting. We talk about individual goals for students. We talk about band goals for individual bands who are working together, how you're going to work together musically, how you're going to work together just as humans. And then we talk about some goals that I help them set. So I never come in and just set a goal out of the blue for students like that, but I do work with them to try to make sure that they're working forward in their musicianship as well. I started talking about the feedback forms. Sometimes I give a quick in the moment one, how you feeling, quick check. Everybody takes 60 seconds to fill it out. And then every 4 weeks or so, like I said, 3 times this semester, I like to give those surveys to the students. And that really helps build the ownership of the class, right? Students always have a say in their groups when they choose the groups that they're working with musically. They don't always get to pick the groups exclusively, but they definitely have a say in it. They choose what instruments they're playing. They choose the style and the music that they want to play. And then also they take that ownership because they're building that program. They're building their group. They're building it musically. They're learning how to speak to each other and work together. And it's their music. It's their bands. And, the student ownership is huge. So if there were only 3 things that you remember from this session, I really hope that it's these 3 things. I think every classroom is really different, and you need to respond to your students and your school's environments and needs. What works for me might not work for you. Take what I gave you today, morph it, tweak it, make it work for you, but really consider your environment. And I would encourage you to really think about building relationships based on trust. because that is the key foundation to allowing students to work independently and informally. And then finally, helping your students with some goal setting that can really drive some of their independent music learning inside and outside of class. So that's all I have for now. I can get really nerdy about this kind of stuff. It's my passion. I've been doing it for a while, and I'll be here if you have any questions or want to talk shop.